A relationship with the right referral partner could be a game changer for any B2B company. So what if you could reverse engineer these relationships at a moment's notice? Start a podcast, invite potential referral partners to be guests on your show, and grow your referral network faster than ever. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to the B2B Growth Show, a podcast dedicated to helping B2B executives achieve explosive growth. Whether you're looking for techniques and strategies or tools and resources, you've come to the right place. I'm James Carberry.
And I'm Jonathan Green.
Let's get into the show. This episode is sponsored by Directive Consulting, the B2B search marketing agency. Welcome back to the B2B Growth Show. We are here today with Allen Gannett. He has been on the show multiple times. He's the CEO at TrackMaven. He's also the author of the brand new book, The Creative Curve, releasing in June. Allen, how you doing today, man?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on the show, man.
I am really pumped to have you. I feel like every time you're on the show, I end up repurposing your episode into a video or some piece of content because it's always gold.
You're so charming.
So I'm really genuinely pumped to be chatting with you today. I've been following you on LinkedIn, and if you're listening to this and you're not following Allen on LinkedIn, you're just not that smart, to be honest. So you should definitely be following him. He's crushing it there. Your engagement has been through the roof. And you're writing this new book, Creative Curve. So first, Allen, tell us a little bit about what you and your team are up to at TrackMaven. And then I want you to tell us kind of the precipice for your book. What made you write The Creative Curve? And then we're going to get into it.
Yeah, so I've been running TrackMaven for about 5.5 years, and we're the marketing insights company. So what we do is we have our own big data platform where we suck in marketing data for a lot of big consumer brands. So like the NBA uses us, Saks Fifth Avenue, Marriott, Honda, all these big brands you've heard of and love. And then what we give them is we have analysis tools and visualization tools to help them understand what are the stories and the patterns in the data. So what are the things they should do more of? What are the things they should do less of? And this is all across digital marketing, so social, content, paid. And then I work a lot with these marketers and these people who are part of this creative industry. But a few years ago, I started realizing that when I was talking to them, there was this sort of weird mentality going on where, they'd say things like, well, I'm not that creative. I need to hire an agency to do that. I wasn't born with that ability. And I started getting frustrated. And I'm a stubborn guy who grew up in New Jersey. And I was like, no, that's not true. Like, if you actually read the stories, read the memoirs, read the autobiographies of these creative geniuses we talk about, when you actually read them, these are not the stories of people who are just, born out of the womb with all this amazing talent. They're not the stories of genetic lottery. They're the stories of hard, thoughtful work. Not just hard work, but hard, thoughtful work. And I got really just sort of pumped up about this. I started giving speeches at marketing conferences about sort of the truth behind creativity and how it's a lot more intentional than it seems. And the talk went over really well. And someone was like, hey, this should be a book. And before long, I was working on a book all about debunking this myth of the inspiration theory of creativity.
I love it. And so you've been teasing kind of I know pieces of what the book is about just from just a little bit of the stuff you've been putting on LinkedIn. And as we were talking about offline, you mentioned one particular thing. We're going to talk about a few things from the book, but one that was really interesting. You have a section in the book that talks about kind of what drives human taste and preference, which is a super interesting idea. Can you talk to us a little bit about that part of the book and what you discovered as you were kind of researching and writing that section of the book?
Yeah, so the book is broken up into two halves. So the first half of the book is debunking this idea of the inspiration theory of creativity, that it's mystical, divine inspiration that's driving creative achievement. The second half of the book, I interviewed 25 living creative geniuses. These are billionaires like David Rubenstein, startup moguls like Kevin Ryan, Alexis Ohanian from Reddit. This is Pasek and Paul, who did the music behind La La Land, Dear Evan Hansen, and The Greatest Showman. It's these people who are sort of living embodiments of creative achievement. And in the first half of the book, what I did is I broke down the science behind creativity, because creativity is one of those things that seems sort of like esoteric and existential, but there's actually a ton of science between neuroscience, psychology, sociology, anthropology. We know a lot about how creativity actually works. And one really great example of this is, creativity by definition is the ability to create things that are both novel and valuable. Novel and valuable. Can't just be novel. Because then it's just, if I just throw paint on a canvas, like if I do it, it's not creative. It's just, I just create something new. If it's just valuable, well, I recently learned how to do conditional color formatting in Excel, and that's valuable, but it's definitely not novel. It's definitely not creative. And so since you have to create things that are both novel and valuable, well, there's an issue. Value is actually a subjective assessment, right? Value, for things to be valuable, we all have to agree they're valuable. So the understanding of human preference, of trends, of consumer likability, these things are critical to actually understanding creativity. And so one of the most interesting things I found in my research is that there's this phenomenon that scientists have found, and the academic term for it, which is kind of horrendous, is the inverted U-shaped relationship between familiarity and preference. And I'll break down what that actually means, but I call it, instead of that, I call it the creative curve. And it's this finding that scientists have found that the more we see something, hear something, experience something, the more we like it up until a point, and then the more we see it, the less we like it. So think about like a song, like maybe the first time you heard the new Drake song, you're like, this is terrible. The third time, you're like, I love this song. The 10th time, you're like, I'm starting to get a little bored. The 15th time, you're like, please stop playing this song. Like, nice for what? Like, I don't know what's nice about this, right? Yeah. And so you have this upside down U-shaped relationship between the more you're exposed to something and the more you like it, and then eventually the less you like it. And so what this means for marketers, creators, for any of these people, is that your job as a marketer is actually to create ideas that are neither too familiar nor too novel. You need to create ideas that are that right blend of familiarity and novelty. You want things that they're not so new that people are like, I don't want to ever experience this again. This is terrifying. And you don't want things that are so familiar that they're bored and they're overdone. So the best ideas are this blend of familiarity and novelty. So you think about the first Star Wars, it was literally a Western in space. That's literally what it was. It was not an entirely new story arc. It was not a new plot. It was a Western in space. Right now, there's this whole trend going around the country of sushi burritos, these giant sushi rolls that you eat like a burrito, and it's familiar and novel. It's taking the country by storm. And so you see this again and again where the ideas that we latch onto from a creative perspective, they're not the ideas that they're so new, and they're not the ideas that are the same old, same old. They're ideas that are a blend of both. And that's one of the most important findings I found in my research, because once you understand that, what you realize is that these great creatives you look up to, really, their skill is not being innovative. Their skill is being just the right level of innovative.
Interesting. And so as it relates to that, Allen, you'd also mentioned offline kind of understanding why trends exist. So the reason that the trend exists is because it's a perfect balance of those two things. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, familiarity and novelty. And the reason why goes back to evolutionary biology, where we have these two contradictory urges. So we like things that are familiar because they represent safety, right? If I saw a cave I've never seen before, well, I'm like, oh, it's probably dangerous. Versus if I saw a cave that I've slept in a million times as a caveman, I go, this is probably safe. But we also are wired to seek out novelty for potential reward, because if we're a hunter-gatherer and we see a berry we've never seen before, it also represents a potential source of new food. But these two things that seem like a contradiction, our search for familiarity and our search for novelty, really what they are is our brain's really elegant way of balancing risk and reward, right? We want to eat that piece of fruit that we've never seen before, but kind of looks like a piece of fruit we have eaten before. If it looks like nothing we've ever seen before, we know we should probably stay away because it might be poisonous. And so these two very primal instincts are actually what drives consumer preference. We want things that are the right balance of familiar and novel.
Today's growth story revolves around search engine marketing. Delphix, a big data platform, had hired an agency to manage their Google ads a few years ago, but they weren't seeing the results they wanted to see. Being such a technical B2B solution, they set out to find a team that could take on their challenge. After countless proposals, they found the perfect fit: Directive Consulting, the B2B search marketing agency. In just 1 week after launching Directive's campaigns, Delphix saw their lead volume double and their cost per lead drop by 60%. I have a hunch that Directive can get these kind of results for you too. So head over to directiveconsulting.com and request a totally free custom proposal. That's directiveconsulting.com. All right, let's get back to this interview.
The marketer listening to this, Allen, to get real practical here. So how do you take that insight that you just shared and how do you actually create campaigns with that in mind?
So the one thing that's really important, obviously, is don't do what everyone else is doing. I think in B2B marketing especially, this is a huge problem. People are doing the same old, and that's not going to drive interest. That's not going to drive consumer preference. Similarly, you can't do something that's so new, right? So the best things are that perfect little blend of familiar and novel. Maybe take an idea from B2C marketing, apply it to B2B marketing, but use the same underlying concepts around product positioning and messaging to actually use that format. So it's about blending those two things. The other thing that marketers need to do that's really important is, well, if familiarity is really important to creating things that stick, well, then you also have to consume a lot of information because you actually have to know what's out there. You have to know what your audience has actually seen. You have to know what will be familiar. So one of the things I found that was so surprising to me was, we talk about creatives. There's this meme, you've probably seen it, of, 90% of people consume, 9% of people engage, 1% of people create. And it's like so stupid. But But the reason why it's stupid is not only is it kind of silly, but also it's just not true. Because when I interviewed these famous creatives, they spent a huge amount of time consuming information very, very narrowly in their niche. And the reason why is that this allows them to understand what is familiar, what their audience already has seen. If part of your job is creating that blend of familiarity and novelty, well, you better know what's familiar to your audience. And that's something that as marketers, you need to do. If you're in a very specific field, let's say you're in cybersecurity, well, damn it, you better read all the stuff your audience is reading. You better have that same underlying exposure to information and content so you know what's interesting, what's overplayed, what's underplayed. You have to understand those two things.
I love it. So one particular use case just in the B2B space that is coming to mind for me, there's a company called Lucid out in Salt Lake City, and the software kind of is this diagramming tool. So you can diagram sales processes. A lot of technical folks use it to diagram kind of like code and stuff, like the technical elements of their product. But they do these incredible videos that are based on like really pop culture references. So they've done, like, they did a doggo video. They've mapped out like the origins of Star Wars and like how Star Wars looks in a Lucid chart, basically.
That's awesome.
They're tapping into culture and to your point, what's familiar and combine it with their product. I mean, their doggo video that they just did had like, I want to say it had like over 10 million views or something crazy like that. Like it went nuts on Facebook and on YouTube. And so is that what you're like, would that be an example of what you're talking about? Like,
example.
But do you see other B2B brands that are doing better at this than most? Cause I totally agree that the B2B world is like a trap for like, okay, let's do another webinar and write another ebook.
Yeah, I mean, that's a perfect example. I mean, I think Moz has always done a good job of this. They started doing like Whiteboard Fridays and a lot of video stuff back when video was really early. So it was applying these new mediums to familiar types of content that usually were through blog posts or white papers, right? Applying that novel twist, and that really stuck out, right? Whiteboard Fridays for Moz did really well because it's nothing that you couldn't read in a blog post. In fact, many of the stuff they had blog posts about, but the format was new. It was different. It was fresh. but it was still in a very familiar type of teaching, a very familiar type of educational value that Moz's audiences knew. And so, yeah, I think what you're describing is a perfect example of it. But I think you don't even have to reference culture. You can just reference new formats, new mediums. There's all sorts of ways you can add that little twist of familiarity and that little twist of novelty.
Interesting. Because we did a Gary V wannabe video series.
I saw it. It was great.
And so it was kind of that same, like, as I'm kind of putting it through your lens now, trying to think of like, okay, the Gary V thing is familiar because people already, love Gary V, and then adding like our little twist to me desperately trying to be him and failing. But even in your videos, Allen, that you're putting out on LinkedIn, I've like been fascinated by them because of their simplicity. You're doing these 1 minute videos. They're captioned, so it I don't have to listen to it. Actually, I can read the video, but LinkedIn seems to be favoring video on LinkedIn. So you're popping up in my feed. I'm consuming that content. And you're asking someone one question. So it's not like you're trying to do a 10-minute video with, these really, I mean, you had Kobe Bryant on one of your videos. Like you're in the room with some incredible people. Can you tell us a little bit about how you thought about like your approach to LinkedIn video and what ultimately kind of got you to land in that space? Because it seems like you kind of ran it through the framework that you just talked us through.
I mean, I've been working on the book for 3 years very slowly. And LinkedIn video came out last July when I had my first version of the manuscript done. And so what I saw it as an opportunity, I was like, one of the things I talk about in my book is the power of timing and how that interacts with familiarity and novelty. And what I realized was that, okay, on LinkedIn, clearly there's going to be things that work, that are new, that are novel. And basically what I was doing was I was taking a concept that I saw work well on Facebook and YouTube, and I was bringing it to LinkedIn early when it wasn't overdone and wasn't overexposed. And I sort of knew it would work. And I did something that I enjoy doing. Like, I'm a very curious person. As part of my job, I'm market facing, so I'm constantly meeting new people. So it's easy for me to film videos. But I sort of knew, like, as long as I executed right, it would work. And that's one of the powerful things once you start understanding creativity as a meta system. It actually makes it a lot easier. So, I did a book trailer for my book. You can watch it on the Creative Curve. And basically my whole idea was, and I credit them pretty directly, is my whole idea was like, let's do sort of a Dollar Shave Club style walk and talk video, but for a book. And, people haven't done it for a book before. So I know the format's interesting and compelling and fun. Let me do it for a book. And I also took some components from like some Wes Anderson-esque scenery and how we did some of the shots. And the whole idea was taking some things from culture and then some other internet verticals that I knew worked and putting them in the format of a book trailer. And it did really well. It went really viral. It got tons and tons and tons of views. I think across all channels, it got like 100,000 views, which is crazy for a book trailer. Yeah. And so that stuff, it makes creativity a lot more accessible because it gives you that way of thinking of like, okay, like, is this going to be something that people resonate with? Or is it going to be too weird? Or is it going to be just more of the same?
Yeah, I love that. Allen, to close it out, I want to talk about data. And I've known you for a couple of years now, and I love the passion that you have for data. And I think there seems to be this weird relationship between the creative process and data. Can you talk to us about kind of how you think about that, and then how that fleshed itself out in the book?
Yeah, so I wrote a chapter all about the use of data-driven cycles in creativity. Because one of the things I thought was fascinating was I interviewed all these great creatives, and they're actually very systematic. We think about creativity as something where you go in a cabin all by yourself, and you come out with your great American novel when it's done. Boom. That's not how creativity works. Across all these different fields, what I found over and over again was that's highly iterative. And they're constantly trying to get in information about what their audience likes. How familiar or novel is it? And so, for example, I spent a day with the Ben & Jerry's flavor team, which was like a lot of fun and really bad for someone who can't tolerate milk. And but it was fun. And I spent a day with them. And you think about they have all these amazing like chefs and food scientists and their R&D team. And you might think, well, they're just like creating flavors and experimenting. But actually what they do is every year They consume tons of information about food and trends. They do these things called trend treks where they actually go and travel to different cities to experience like what are local restaurants doing, what new flavors are bars experimenting with, do local, grocers have interesting new products and tastes. Then they take all that information and they come up with a list of 200 ideas that they think match, what's going to be in that sweet spot of familiarity and novelty. Then they literally send an email survey to their email subscribers that asks 2 questions for each flavor idea. 1, how likely are you to buy this flavor? And 2, how unique is it? Another way to put this is how familiar and how novel is it? Because if they just ask you how likely are you to buy it, well, they'd end up with an entire line full of cookies and brownie and caramel flavors, which sounds good, but it would eventually make the brand tired, stale, and the entire brand would eventually fail. But if they just focused on uniqueness, well, then you'd have flavors that might be too unique. So what they found is they can actually survey people and find what's that sweet spot between familiarity and novelty. And from there, once they actually winnowed down the list, only then do they actually go into creating samples and batches and doing that type of testing. And so that's just a small example, but one of the most powerful ways that marketers can use data is a way to understand where something will fall in that bell curve relationship between familiarity and novelty for their audience, right? Listening to your audience. If your job is to create something for an audience, you darn well better listen to them.
This has been phenomenal. If there's somebody listening to this, obviously they need to go and pre-order the Creative Curve right now. So 1, where can they do that? And then how can they stay connected with you and learn more about TrackMaven as well?
Yeah, so if you go to thecreativecurve.com, there's links, book trailers, reviews, all sorts of stuff. For me, go to allen.xyz, that's ALLEN.xyz, and you can find links to TrackMaven and my social media and all that good stuff. And thanks so much, James.
Awesome, Allen. Well, again, thank you so much for your time today. This has been phenomenal, and I really appreciate it.
Bye, dude.
There are lots of ways to build a community, and we've chosen to build the B2B growth community through this podcast. But because of the way podcasts work, it's really hard to engage with our listeners. And without engagement, it's tough to build a great community. So here's what we've decided to do. We're organizing small dinners across the country with our listeners and guests. No sales pitches, no agenda, just great conversations with like-minded people. We'll talk business, we'll talk family, we'll talk goals and dreams. We'll build friendships. So if you'd like to be a part of a B2B growth dinner in a city near you, go to b2bgrowthdinners.com. That's b2bgrowthdinners.com. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.